So it's a very broad word, and if I could divide that from our sectors, at least let's focus on solar. Wind is another topic altogether. So if we talk about technology in solar, then we have seen improvements in three, four areas. We all would remember that 3 years back, it was all poly modules, polycrystalline modules. They were typically 330 watt peak modules. And what we are talking about today, this poly market is almost zero. If you talk to any manufacturer, there is a very limited amount of polycrystalline modules available in their broader lines. So if worldwide we have, let's say 300, 400 gigawatt of module manufacturing capacity, hardly 10% or 5% of that would have been left as polycrystalline manufacturing. Everybody has moved from poly, first they moved to mono, and from mono now they have moved to bifacial. Most of the new lines that are being set up in India are of 600 watt peak modules or plus. So that's a kind of trend that we are seeing on the module side. And when I talk in terms of numbers, so they would be almost like a poly module of 20 cents is almost equivalent to a bifacial module of 16 cents. So that's the kind of almost 4 to 5% increase in the generation has happened between bifacial and the poly modules. So that's on the module side. Similarly, we have seen a lot of technology improvement on the tracker side. If you leave India, if we talk about most of the advanced countries, they have moved to trackers. And if we do a combination of bifacial and trackers, it can give a generation as high as 25% plus as compared to a fixed tilt monofacial modules. So India is not getting a lot of advantage out of bifacial technologies because in India, the cost of labor is very cheap. But whichever geographies where cost of labor is very high, people have moved to bifacial and really gained a lot out of it. So like that, if we talk about technology, there are multiple things which has happened in the entire value chain in solar. Now, the question is that right now, because of the demand supply gap, specifically in the silicon, all these technology advantages, which should have been reflected in terms of reduction in the module prices, have been washed away. A polysilicon, which can be available at a variable cost of 6.5 cents or 6.6 cents, is now being sold at 36 to 37 cents. So just because of the shortfall in only one component in the value chain, the whole industry has been taken on toss. And that's why I was trying to explain, while the industry at the time of bidding thought because of these technology advances, the polysilicon, the whole module price will go down. But what has happened because of the shortage in polysilicon, it has been in the reverse gear. And in the entire 10, 15 years of at least my experience in the solar, and solar is not older than this, it being the first time that we are seeing that module prices have started increasing suddenly, and it's been almost a year since it has been happening. So that's the answer to your first part, which is the technology part. The answer to your second question on the fundraise, as I was saying, if you see RUM's bid, for every 1 megawatt, there are 22, for every bid, there are 22 participants. So the ratio was 22:1. Similarly, if you see any other SECI bid, there's too much of a competition. People have been quoting a very aggressive number. So that shows that there's a lot of capital which is chasing less number of bids. Now, one reason is because we, like IPPs, raising capital. I would say the second reason for this kind of a aggressive bidding and too much of capital floating around is the PSUs. Never in the history of solar in India, PSUs have participated in the solar sector bids. PGCIL was participating in the transmission sector, so that was okay. But suddenly now there are 4 or 5 large PSUs, and in sometimes there are almost 8 or 9 PSUs which are ready to bid in any sector. And as you were talking about, where is the large bucket of capital ready to invest in the solar sector, then you look at NTPC, then you look at SJVNL, then you look at CIL, then you look at, so there are a lot of, and maybe Neyveli Lignite Corporation. These are entities which can invest heavily in solar. And this is on top of whatever money the sector has raised in India in the private equity space, which also is pretty bullish. There are companies like Azure and Renew, which has been listed now in Nasdaq. So there are listed entities, there are P-driven entities. So various forms of capital is really getting invested in India. And we really hope for that the number of bids increases. Otherwise, it will be too much of capital chasing a very limited 10, 15 gigawatt of bids.